When Sarah, a mute ICU nurse, frantically signed the words, "Help me," to a lone biker in the hospital parking lot, she expected a nod of sympathy. She didn't expect the ground to shake. 5 minutes later, the sterile silence of the hospital was shattered by the roar of 20 engines. 20 Hell's Angels didn't just show up, they followed her straight to room 402 to confront the man who thought her silence was a weakness. He thought she was an easy target until he realized he was staring down an entire brotherhood. Before we get into this incredible story of the family we choose and the protectors who stand in the gap, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city and country in the comments below. We love seeing how far our stories travel. And if you believe that everyone deserves a voice, hit that subscribe button and join our community. Now, let's go back to that rainy Tuesday night at St. Jude's Memorial. The life of a nurse is measured in heartbeats and monitors, but for Sarah, it was measured in observations. Sarah had lost her voice at the age of 6 in a car accident that took her father and left her vocal cords irreparably damaged. Instead of letting the silence break her, she used it. She became a nurse who could read a patient's pain before they even felt it. She noticed the slight grimace of a sleeping patient, the tremor in a hand, the fear in an eye. But Sarah was currently living through a nightmare that no medical textbook could prepare her for. St. Jude was a prestigious hospital, and prestige often came with a price: the ego of its donors. Mark Henderson was a powerful corporate attorney, a man whose name was etched on the wings of local libraries and whose influence reached deep into the hospital's board of directors. He had been admitted for a minor cardiac event, but his behavior was anything but professional. For 3 days, he had targeted Sarah. He realized early on that she couldn't scream, and to a predator like Henderson, that was an invitation. The harassment began subtly: a hand lingering too long on her shoulder, a comment about how her quietness made her the perfect woman. But by the second night, it had escalated into something much darker. Henderson would purposely spill his water just to watch her clean it up. He would block the doorway when she tried to leave, laughing when she frantically checked her watch. "You're so much better than the others," Henderson had whispered to her earlier that evening, his hand lingering too long on her arm as she adjusted his blood pressure cuff. His grip was firm, almost bruising. "You don't talk back, you just obey. I like that. I bet you've spent your whole life being told what to do because you can't speak up for yourself. Am I right?" Sarah had pulled away, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and fury. She reached for her whiteboard to write a warning, but Henderson had snatched the marker from her hand, snapping it in two before dropping the pieces into the trash. "Don't bother," he'd sneered, leaning into her personal space. "Who would believe you? I'm the biggest donor this hospital has. I have the CEO on speed dial. You're just a broken girl in blue scrubs. If you say a word, well, if you try to say a word, I'll have you fired before your shift ends." By 8 p.m., Sarah was trembling. She had tried to tell her supervisor, Beverly, about the incident. She had minded the snapped marker and the bruising grip on her arm. But Beverly's response was cold and dismissive. "He's a VIP, Sarah. His family just donated $5 million to the new surgical wing. Just finished the shift. We can't afford a lawsuit or a PR disaster. Avoid him if you can, but don't cause trouble." The feeling of isolation was crushing. Sarah felt like she was drowning in a room full of people. She went to the break room, but her colleagues lowered their eyes. They knew what was happening, but they were all afraid of the Henderson reach. Feeling suffocated, Sarah stepped out to the ambulance bay for a breath of air. The rain was misting, turning the asphalt into a dark mirror, and the city lights felt miles away. That's when she saw him. Jax was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite and rode tar. As the president of the local Hell's Angels chapter, he carried a reputation for being ruthless in business, but fiercely loyal to those he called family. Every month, Jax visited Old Man Miller, a retired biker spending his final days in the hospital's hospice wing. Jax was leaning against his Harley, lighting a cigarette when he noticed the nurse. He'd seen her before. She was the one who always made sure Miller had fresh water and a clean pillow. He liked her because she didn't chatter. She just did her work with a quiet dignity he respected. But tonight, she looked different. Her shoulders were hunched, and she was clutching her wrist, a wrist that bore the dark purple imprints of a man's fingers. Jax didn't say anything. At first, he just watched the way she breathed, her chest hitching as she tried not to cry. Sarah looked at Jax. She knew who he was. Everyone in town knew the patch, the winged death's head. But in that moment, she didn't see a criminal or a threat. She saw a man who didn't look like he took orders from CEOs or lawyers. She saw a man who lived by a different code. With shaking hands, Sarah caught his eye. She didn't have her board. She didn't have her voice. She raised her hands into the dim light. She signed HLP, the universal gesture for distress. Then she pointed to the marks on her arm. She pointed to the fourth floor windows where the VIP suites were and mouthed the words clearly. Room 402. He won't let me go. He's hurting me. Jax's eyes went from the nurse's pale face to the bruises on her arm. The cigarette in his hand froze. A cold, hard light ignited in his gaze. The kind of light that usually preceded a storm. He didn't ask if she was sure. He didn't ask for proof or if she was misinterpreting the patient's intent. He saw the truth in her eyes and the marks on her skin. Sarah, right. Jax's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. She nodded, a single tear finally escaping. Go back up there, Jax said, flicking his cigarette away into the puddles. Go to your station. I need to make a phone call. Sarah hesitated. She was terrified that he would ride away. But Jax's expression was one of absolute, ironclad certainty. Go now. You're under the protection of the wing now, sis. Act like it. Nobody touches what belongs to us. And right now, you're under our shadow. Sarah returned to the fourth floor. The air felt different. It was like the calm before a hurricane. She tried to stay at the nurse's station, burying her head in paperwork, but the peace didn't last. At 9:15 p.m., Henderson's call light began to blink incessantly. When no one answered, immediately, he walked into the hallway, his silk robe over his hospital gown. Looking for her. Sarah, he barked, his voice echoing through the quiet, sterile ward. I've been ringing for 10 minutes. I need my medication and I want you to bring it to my room privately. I'm not going to tell you again. Elena, a younger nurse on duty, tried to intervene. Mr. Henderson, Sarah is busy with another patient's vitals. I can help you with your meds. I didn't ask you, you cow. Henderson roared, stepping into the center of the hall. The vitriol in his voice made the other nurses flinch. I pay for this floor. I pay your salary. I've donated more to this building than your entire family will make in a lifetime. Now Sarah, get in that room. He marched over and grabbed Sarah's arm. Again, his fingers digging into the same bruises Jax had seen. He began pulling her toward room 402. The other nurses stood frozen, paralyzed by the fear of losing their jobs. Sarah dug her heels in, her eyes searching the elevator doors, her heart hammering like a trapped bird. She couldn't scream, but her eyes were pleading with anyone to step in. Then it started. It began as a vibration in the floorboards. A low-frequency hum made the medicine vials rattle in their glass cabinets. It sounded like a massive beast was waking up in the basement. Then it became a roar. It wasn't just one engine. It was a synchronized chorus of pure power. It sounded like a fleet of bombers was flying 10 feet above the roof of St. Jude's downstairs. The peace of the hospital entrance was decimated. 20 Harleys tore into the main circle, the sound reflecting off the glass towers. They didn't park in the back or search for a spot. They dropped there. Kickstands right in the middle of the emergency only and no parking zones, forming a semicircle of steel. Jax led the way, stepping off his bike before the engine had even finished cooling. Behind him were 19 of his brothers, men like Ironclad, a former powerlifter, Bear, who was 7 feet of muscle and beard, and Twitch, who looked like he'd survived a dozen wars. They were a wall of denim, leather, and scars. They didn't wait for the elevator. They knew the elevators were too slow. They took the stairs, their heavy engineer boots sounding like a rhythmic military march, hitting the tile. Thud, thud, thud. On the 4th floor, Henderson was still dragging Sarah, his face contorted with a smug sense of victory. "You're going to learn some respect tonight," he hissed in her ear. "You're going to learn that silence doesn't mean you get to crash." The double doors to the ICU wing didn't just open. They were thrown back so hard they hit the rubber stoppers and bounced. 20 Hell's Angels filed into the hallway in perfect terrifying formation. They didn't yell. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. The sheer presence of 20 enters in a sterile white hospital environment was more terrifying than any shout. It was like a pack of wolves had entered a sheepfold. Jax was at the front. He walked straight down the center of the hall, the brothers flanking him, creating a corridor of leather that stretched from the elevators to the nurses' station. They stopped 10 feet from Henderson. The silence that followed the roar of their arrival was even more frightening. It was the silence of a predator watching its prey. Henderson let go of Sarah as if her skin had turned to white-hot iron. He stumbled back, his eyes bulging, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. What is this? Security. Call security. Why are these people here? Henderson yelled, his voice cracking and jumping an octave. Security is busy watching the bikes, Jack said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the ward. It was terrifyingly calm. He walked over to Sarah and stood beside her, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder in a gesture of ownership and protection. He was twice Henderson's size and 10 times as intimidating. Jax looked at the marks on Sarah's arm, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle pulsed in his temple. Then he looked at the crowd of nurses and the supervisor, Beverly, who had been too scared to help. Finally, his eyes landed on Henderson. "I hear you have a lot to say, counselor," Jack said. "I hear you like to talk to people who can't talk back. You think because someone is quiet, they're alone. I don't know who you think you are," Henderson began, trying to summon his lawyer bravado, though his hands were shaking so hard he had to tuck them into his robe pockets. "You're trespassing. This is a private facility. I'll have you all in prison by morning. We're the people who listen." Jax interrupted, stepping into Henderson's personal space. He leaned in close, the scent of leather and tobacco overpowering Henderson's expensive cologne. "And Sarah here just told us everything without saying a single word. She's got a whole family you didn't know about, Mark. And we don't like it when people touch our family." Behind Jax, 20 men crossed their arms in unison. The sound of 20 leather vests creaking was the only noise in the hallway. It was the sound of an impending storm. "You're going to go back into that room," Jack said, pointing a thick tattooed finger at room 402. "You're going to sit in that bed, and you're not going to breathe near this woman again. Because if she signs to me one more time, if she even looks like she's had a bad day, if I see so much as a shadow of a bruise on her, I won't come back with 20 brothers. I'll come back with the whole state. Chapter, and we won't be visiting old man Miller. We'll be visiting you." Henderson was shaking so hard his knees were literally knocking together. He looked at the wall of bikers, then at Sarah, who was standing tall, her chin up for the first time in years. He realized in that moment that all his money and all his VIP status meant nothing against 20 men who didn't care about his bank account. Without a word, The powerful attorney turned and scurried into his room, locking the door behind him. Jax turned to Beverly, the supervisor. She's taking her break now, Jax said. It wasn't a request. And we're going to sit with her. I suggest you go find her a fresh marker and a new whiteboard, a big one. For the next 4 hours, the 4th floor of St. Jude's was the safest place on earth. 20 Hells Angels sat in the waiting room in the cafeteria. They didn't cause trouble. They didn't smoke inside. They bought coffee and talked quietly among themselves. But their message was clear to everyone in that building. Sarah was not alone. She had a voice and it was 20 engines loud. However, as the clock ticked toward 4 a.m. and the sun began to hint at the horizon, the real trouble arrived. 2 police cruisers and a black SUV belonging to the hospital CEO pulled into the lot. Henderson had spent the last 4 hours on his cell phone, calling in every favor he had. He was claiming he was being held hostage by a violent gang, and he wanted Sarah fired, her license revoked and the bikers in chains. The CEO, a man named Philip Sterling, stepped out of the elevator with the police, looking ready to purge his hospital of the element. He looked at Jax and his brothers and sneered. I want these men removed, and I want Nurse Sarah's resignation on my desk in 5 minutes. Jax stood up, towering over the CEO, and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. You might want to check the news first, Phil. We've been busy tonight. The tension in the hallway was thick enough to choke the life out of the room. Philip Sterling, the CEO of St. Jude's, stood there in his custom-tailored Italian suit, looking like a man who had never been told no in his entire life. He was flanked by 4 police officers who looked increasingly uncomfortable, their hands resting nervously on their utility belts. Behind them, the door to room 402 cracked open. Mark Henderson peeked his head out, his hair disheveled, but a look of smug triumph returning to his face. He saw the badges, and he saw the CEO. He thought the cavalry had arrived to clean up his mess. He thought the system was finally back on his side to crush the people who dared to challenge him. This is an outrage, Sterling barked, his voice echoing off the sterile linoleum walls. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Jax. This is a place of healing, a world-class institution, not a clubhouse for criminals and thugs. Officers, I want these men removed immediately. Arrest them for trespassing, for creating a public disturbance, and for witness intimidation. And Sarah, he turned his cold, predatory gaze toward the mute nurse. You are done. You have fundamentally compromised the safety of this hospital by bringing a gang into these halls. You have endangered our most prominent donor and a man of great standing in this community. Your employment has been terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to your locker, and I will personally see to it that the nursing board hears of your gross negligence. Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis. Her job was more than a paycheck. It was her sanctuary. It was the only place where her silence didn't feel like a disability. Where her hands could heal people in ways words never could. She opened her mouth to try and force a sound out. Any sound, a scream of frustration, a cry for justice, but only a dry, painful wheeze escaped her throat. She felt the familiar sting of tears, that crushing, suffocating weight of powerlessness she had felt since the day of the accident. She reached for her whiteboard, her fingers trembling, but Sterling stepped forward and slapped it out of her hand. The plastic board clattered across the floor, sliding under a gurney. No more notes, Sterling yelled, his face turning a dark, ugly shade of purple. Pack your things and get out. But Jax didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon or raise his fists. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his heavy leather vest and pulled out a sleek black tablet. He tapped the screen with a tattooed thumb and turned it around, holding it steady so the CEO and the police officers could see the display. The light from the Screen reflected in Jax's cold, steady eyes. You might want to hold off on that pink slip, Phil, Jax said, his voice like the low growl of a predator. See, while we were sitting here drinking your terrible, overpriced hospital coffee, our brothers on the outside were doing a little bit of due diligence. We have a few members in our national chapter who are very, very good with technology. They used to work for the types of three-letter agencies you're so afraid of. They spent the last 3 hours looking into Mr. Henderson's private server. It's amazing what people leave in there cloud storage when they think they're untouchable behind a law degree and a big bank account. The CEO paused, his brow furrowing as he tried to maintain his bravado. What are you talking about? That's illegal. Any evidence you think you have is inadmissible. Jax ignored him and looked at the lead officer, a veteran sergeant named Miller. Go ahead, Sergeant. Press play on that top file. It's a public service announcement. Officer Miller stepped forward, hesitant at first, but his curiosity won out. He tapped the screen. The hallway went deathly silent as a video began to play. It wasn't a grainy security feed. It was high-definition footage from a hidden security camera, likely one Henderson had installed in his own luxury apartment to record his conquests. The video showed Henderson sitting on a leather sofa, nursing a scotch, bragging to a business associate about how he had bought the board at St. Jude's. He laughed as he explained how he used his donations as leverage to cover up a series of medical malpractice suits he was handling. He specifically named Sterling, calling him a glorified errand boy who would do whatever he was told to keep the money flowing. He mocked the staff, calling the nurses disposable labor, and joked about how the quiet one in the ICU was his favorite because she couldn't complain to the HR department. The silence that followed was heavy. The police officers looked at each other, then at the CEO. But Jax wasn't finished. He scrolled to the next folder. These are leaked emails, Jax continued. They show that Henderson has been skimming funds from the very donations he claimed to be giving the hospital. He's been using the VIP wing as a front for a massive money laundering scheme involving several offshore accounts. He wasn't donating money, Phil. He was cleaning it, and you were helping him. Henderson's face went from white to a sickly mottled gray. He tried to retreat into room 402 to hide behind the door, but Ironclad, the massive biker who had been standing guard, stepped in the way. He didn't touch him. He just stood there, a mountain of denim and muscle blocking the only exit. Wait, there's one more thing you should see, Jack said, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a death sentence. This is a list of 3 other nurses who worked at this hospital over the last 2 years. All of them filed harassment complaints against Henderson. All of them described the same behavior Sarah experienced tonight. And all 3 of them were quietly resigned with a non-disclosure agreement and a small payout from the CO's discretionary fund. Officer Miller took the tablet from Jax's hand. He watched the video again, his jaw tightening so hard the bone protruded. He looked at Sarah, seeing the dark purple bruises on her arm, and then he looked at Henderson, who was now trembling in his silk robe. Miller turned to the CEO. Mr. Sterling, Officer Miller said, his voice echoing with authority. It looks like we have a lot more than trespassing going on here tonight. We have documented evidence of financial fraud, witness intimidation, sexual battery, and a systematic cover-up of criminal activity. Sergeant, secure that tablet. And you, he pointed to the officer on his left. Get the handcuffs. Mr. Henderson, get out of here. You aren't going home. You're going to the station for processing. You can't do this. Henderson screamed, his voice reaching a hysterical pitch. Do you know who I am? I'll have your badges for breakfast. Philip, do something. But Sterling was silent. He was looking at the ground. His career and his reputation dissolving. In real time, he knew that if he spoke, he'd only be digging his own grave. As the police led Henderson away in Handcuffs, the hallway erupted in a different kind of noise. The nurses who had been hiding in the break room, the ones who had been told to keep their heads down, started to come out. They weren't looking at the floor anymore. They were looking at Sarah with a mixture of awe and guilt. Elena walked over and gripped Sarah's hand, her eyes filled with an apology she didn't know how to voice. Sterling looked at Sarah, his voice suddenly desperate. A complete 180 from the man who had fired her 5 minutes ago. Sarah, listen, let's be reasonable. We can discuss your position. This was all a massive misunderstanding. Perhaps a promotion to lead clinical coordinator of the entire wing. A 20% raise. We can wipe your record clean. Sarah didn't even look at him. She reached down, picked up her whiteboard from the floor, and wiped away the old marks. She wrote one word, in large bold black letters, and O. She walked over to her locker, her movements steady and sure. She pulled out her bag, removed her hospital ID badge, and handed it to Beverly, the head nurse. She didn't need to write a resignation letter. The look in her eyes said everything. She was done with St. Jude's. She was done with a system that only protected the loud and the wealthy. She was done being a disposable piece of a corporate machine. Where am I going to go? Sarah signed to Jax as they walked toward the elevators. Her hands moved with a quick, fluid grace, the fear replaced by a quiet, burning curiosity. Jax smiled, a genuine, warm expression that didn't reach the public often. We've been talking about that, sis. The club runs a community clinic over on the west side near the old docks. It's for the people who don't have insurance, for the kids on the street who've been forgotten, for the veterans who are struggling. We've got the doctors and we've got the supplies, but we don't have someone to run the floor. We need someone who knows how to listen. Someone who doesn't need to shout to be in charge. We need a heart for that place. Sarah's eyes widened. You want me to run a clinic? We don't just want you, Jack said, gesturing to the 20 men standing in the lobby as the elevator doors opened. They were waiting for her. A wall of brotherhood that had stayed through the night. You're one of us now. We're your new security team. We're your family. And in this family, everyone gets a voice, whether they speak or not. The transition wasn't easy, but it was beautiful. 6 months later, the Silent Angel Clinic opened its doors in a refurbished brick building. It didn't have the marble floors of St. Jude's, but it had something better. Trust. A row of Harleys was always parked out front, a silent warning to anyone who thought they could bring trouble to the neighborhood. Sarah was the heart of the operation. She became a legend in the community. The patients knew that nurse. Sarah didn't need to say a word to understand them. She could read a fever, a fracture, or a broken spirit just by looking into a person's eyes. And the bikers stayed true to their word. Every Saturday during the clinic's busiest hours, members of the Hells Angels would sit in the waiting room. They'd hand out stickers to the kids, drink coffee, and ensure that every person who walked through those doors felt safe. One afternoon, Jax walked in to find Sarah teaching a group of local foster children how to use sign language. She was laughing, a silent, shaking laughter that made her whole face glow. She looked up and saw Jax, her hands flying into a series of signs that he now understood perfectly. What's she saying, Jax? One of the kids asked, tugging on the biker's leather sleeve. Jax looked at the boy, then at Sarah, his silent angel. She's saying that sometimes the loudest voices in the world are the ones that never say a single word. She's saying that as long as you have people who love you, you'll never be unheard. As the sun set over the clinic, casting long shadows across the brickwork, the roar of 20 engines began to fill the air. It wasn't the sound of a gang or a threat. It was the sound of a shield. Sarah stood in the doorway, her blue scrubs replaced by a black vest Jax had given her with silent angel embroidered in silver over her heart. She watched her brothers ride off into the night, the chrome of their bikes glinting like stars. She breathed in the cool night air, knowing that she would never have to be afraid of the silence again because she wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was part of something bigger. She was a sister. This story reminds us that justice doesn't always come from the people in high offices or expensive suits. True justice is found in the people who are willing to stand up and be a voice for those who have been silenced. Sarah found her power not in her vocal cords, but in the roar of a brotherhood that refused to let her be pushed aside. What would you do if you saw someone being bullied by someone powerful? Would you stand by and hope someone else speaks up, or would you be the one to answer the call? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one of them. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to know they aren't alone. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about the incredible strength of the human spirit and the heroes who emerge from the most unexpected places. Remember, you don't need a loud voice to make a big difference in this world. You just need the right people standing in your corner. Thank you for being part of our journey today. Stay safe, stay strong, and always look out for one